Thank you, Jillian. And breaking news now, Savannah Guthrie posting a few moments ago a new video, an update on the search for her mother. A major headline, the reward is up to $1 million from the family. We're going to play the video for you in full. It runs a few minutes, and we'll watch this together now.
I'm coming on to say it is day 24 since our mom was taken in the dark of night from her bed. And every hour and minute and second and every long night has been agony since then of worrying about her and fearing for her and aching for her. And most of all, just missing her, We know that millions of you have been praying. So many people have been praying of every faith and no faith at all, praying for her return. And we feel those prayers. Please keep praying without ceasing. We still believe. We still believe in a miracle. We still believe that she can come home. Hope against hope. As my sister says, we are blowing on the embers of hope. We also know that she may be lost. She may already be gone. She may have already gone home to the Lord that she loves and is dancing in heaven with her mom and her dad and with her beloved brother Pierce and with our daddy. And if this is what is to be, then we will accept it. But we need to know where she is. We need her to come home. For that reason, we are offering a family reward of up to $1 million for any information that leads us to her recovery. All of the information about this reward and the details is in the caption below. You can call the 1-800-TIP line. You can be anonymous if you want. Someone out there knows something that can bring her home. Somebody knows. And we are begging you to please come forward now. We also know that we are not alone in our loss. We know there are millions of families that have suffered with this kind of uncertainty. And for that reason today, we also are donating $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for their work in helping families who are coping with loss and actively looking for those who are lost. We are hoping that the attention that has been given to our mom and our family will extend to all the families like ours who are in need and need prayers and need support. So please, if you hear this message, if you've been waiting and you haven't been sure, let this be your sign to please come forward, tell what you know, and help us bring our beloved mom home so that we can either celebrate a glorious, miraculous homecoming or celebrate the beautiful, brave, and courageous and noble life that she has lived. Please be the light in the dark. Thank you.
On the morning of February 1st, 2026, a quiet neighborhood in the Catalina Foothills just north of Tucson, Arizona, woke up to a silence that nobody could explain. A grandmother was gone. Her phone was still on the nightstand. Her medication was still on the counter. Her personal belongings sat exactly where she had left them the night before. But Nancy Guthrie was nowhere to be found. She was 84 years old. She had spent decades building a life in Tucson, a life rooted in faith, in family, in the kind of quiet daily routine that most people never think twice about. She was supposed to watch a church live stream that Sunday morning with a friend. A simple plan, a normal Sunday. She never showed up. When her family arrived at her home around 11 that morning and found no trace of her, they did the only thing left to do. They called 911. What law enforcement found when they walked through that front door was not the scene of a woman who had simply stepped out. It was not the scene of a medical situation. What they found told a far more serious story. A story that Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos would later stand before cameras and confirm without hesitation. He believed Nancy Guthrie had been taken from her own home against her will, in the middle of the night, while her family slept just miles away, while her neighbors went about their evening completely unaware. A doorbell camera had captured someone approaching her front door. A suspect, masked, gloved, moving with clear intention. And then the footage went dark. In the weeks that followed, this case became one of the most closely watched missing person investigations in recent American history. The FBI deployed agents. Drones swept miles of desert terrain. Tips flooded in from across the country. Savannah Guthrie, Nancy's daughter and co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, stepped away from her career and stood before cameras not as a journalist, but as a daughter begging for her mother to come home. Rewards climbed past $1 million. The President of the United States posted publicly about it. Over 400 law enforcement personnel worked the case at the same time. And still, 26 days later, no arrest, no named suspect, no answers. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. Now here is the part that should sit with you before we go any further. Somewhere out there, right now, someone knows something about what happened to this woman. Maybe it is one person. Maybe it is more than one. But the FBI has said it clearly. They do not need another 1,000 tips. They need one. The right one. From the right person. That person might be in someone's circle. They might be someone's neighbor, someone's co-worker, someone whose name has come up in passing conversation but never made it to a phone call to law enforcement. And every single day that passes without that call is another day Nancy Guthrie's family wakes up without knowing where their mother is. If you scrolled past this story the first time you saw it, that is understandable. There is a lot happening in the world. But you are here now. You are watching. And that means something. Because awareness in cases like this one is not passive. It is active. Every person who watches, who shares, who keeps this story in front of new eyes is doing something that matters. The family of Nancy Guthrie is not asking for sympathy. They are asking for help. And the least any of us can do is make sure this story reaches the one person who has been sitting on the answer. Subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already. Share this video before it ends. Because if this were your mother, your grandmother, the woman who raised you, you would want every person who saw this to do exactly that. This is the story of what happened on the night of January 31st, 2026, and the questions that have not stopped since. Stay with us, because Nancy Guthrie's family cannot
activity
afford
at the
for the world
84-year-old's
to
home.
look away.
A day after, Today Show host Savannah Guthrie offered a $1 million reward to find and return her mother. Joining me now is Incident Commander for the United Cajun Navy, Josh Gill, the volunteer search and rescue organization specializing in finding missing persons and aiding in natural disasters. Josh, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for your time. I could be totally wrong here because I know law enforcement keeps a lot of things close to the vest, but as an outsider, it does seem as though the case is starting to run cold. What's your read on where the investigation stands, and why did you decide to go in now?
Well, ma'am, first of all, thank you for having me this morning. I really don't see where the case is going cold. I see where the case is somewhat at a steady state. I'm not super familiar with the clues or the tips or what law enforcement is currently working on. And what we did was we decided to come and try and get a face-to-face sit down with the sheriff to offer our services. Again, our organization is a force multiplier, additional boots on the ground with some additional resources that we could
The
provide.
first thing investigators had to do was reconstruct the night, minute by minute, detail by detail, because somewhere between 9:50 p.m. on January 31st and 11 a.m. on February 1st, a window of time existed where something happened inside that house. And the only way to understand what that something was to let the evidence speak. What the evidence said was alarming. When Pima County Sheriff's deputies processed the residence on February 1st, they found forensic evidence at the scene that confirmed this was not a voluntary disappearance. The Sheriff's Department confirmed that physical evidence consistent with a struggle was recovered from the property. Forensic testing later confirmed that this evidence was linked directly to Nancy Guthrie. That single detail transformed the nature of this case entirely. This was no longer a missing person report. This was a crime scene. Then came the footage. Nancy Guthrie's home was equipped with a Nest doorbell camera positioned at her front entrance. When investigators reviewed that footage, they found exactly what they had feared. In the late hours of January 31st, a figure approached the front door of the residence. The individual was wearing a face mask, gloves, and a black backpack. The FBI would later identify that backpack specifically as a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, the kind sold at Walmart and other major retailers across the country. The suspect was male, average build, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. He moved with intention, and before the footage cut out entirely, he was seen tampering with the camera itself, disabling it from the outside. The moment that camera went offline, whatever happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home happened without a single frame of recorded evidence. But the doorbell camera was not the only piece of technology investigators turned to. Nancy Guthrie wore a pacemaker, a medical device connected via Bluetooth to a dedicated application on her smartphone. That phone, as family members confirmed, was kept on or near her nightstand each night. As long as Nancy and her pacemaker remained within a reasonable proximity to that phone, the Bluetooth connection between the two devices stayed active. Investigators analyzed the data from that application carefully. What they found was a gap, a significant one. The doorbell camera was disabled at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st. But the Bluetooth connection between Nancy's pacemaker and her phone did not sever until 2:28 a.m. That is a span of 41 minutes. 41 minutes during which the suspect remained inside that home with Nancy Guthrie, completely out of sight of any recording device. That 41-minute window became one of the most examined details in the entire investigation. Law enforcement did not publicly offer an explanation for it, but criminal investigators and forensic experts who spoke to the media noted that this kind of extended presence at a scene does not align with a quick, calculated operation. It raises questions, serious ones, about what was happening inside that house during those 41 minutes, and why leaving quickly was not a priority. In the days that followed the initial discovery, law enforcement expanded its forensic work beyond the residence itself. A glove was recovered approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. Investigators sent it for analysis, specifically to determine whether it matched the glove worn by the suspect seen in the doorbell camera footage. Sources confirmed that visually, it appeared consistent with what the suspect was wearing that night. However, when the glove was tested against the FBI's existing criminal database, it did not produce a match. No known offender in the system was connected to it. That result did not close the door. It simply meant the person responsible had no prior record in federal databases, or at minimum, had never provided a DNA sample that was on file. Separately, partial DNA was recovered directly from Nancy Guthrie's property. This evidence was sent for forensic analysis. Investigators confirmed that the DNA collected did not match any of the family members. That was a critical development. It placed an unknown individual's biological material at the scene. But DNA processing, particularly for partial samples, takes time, weeks in some cases, and the investigation could not wait. Law enforcement moved on multiple fronts simultaneously. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed that investigators were using the science of genetic genealogy as part of their approach. Genetic genealogy is the same investigative method that helped identify the Golden State Killer in California after decades of that investigation going cold. It works by comparing DNA profiles against publicly available genealogy databases to identify potential relatives of an unknown suspect, then narrowing down from there. It is a careful, methodical process. It is not fast, but it has produced results in cases that once seemed impossible to crack. The FBI also confirmed it had received and was actively taking seriously 2 emails that appeared to be ransom demands. Those emails have been sent not to the Guthrie family directly, but to media organizations. The ransom demands requested payment in Bitcoin. 2 deadlines referenced in those communications came and passed. By February 9th, both had expired without any verified contact from whoever sent them. There was no proof of life provided at any point. No photograph. No audio recording. No video confirmation that Nancy Guthrie was in the custody of whoever was making these demands. The family publicly stated they needed to know she was alive before any discussion of terms could move forward. That confirmation never came. On February 24th, after 3 weeks of searching, the Guthrie family announced a private reward of up to $1 million for any information leading to Nancy's recovery. That announcement triggered a surge of more than 1,500 new tips to law enforcement within days. The FBI was already offering a separate reward of $100,000. Tucson Crime Stoppers had added an additional $102,500. By day 26, the investigation remained wide open. The evidence was there. The timeline existed. The DNA was in a lab somewhere, waiting to speak. But the answers were still out of reach. And the clock, for a family desperate for closure, was never stopping. When a case of this magnitude lands on a sheriff's desk, the first decision that has to be made is not about suspects. It is not about evidence. It is about trust. The public has to trust that the people leading the investigation know exactly what they are doing. And in the case of Nancy Guthrie, that responsibility fell squarely on the shoulders of Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos. From the very first press conference, Nanos was measured, deliberate. He chose his words carefully, and that was not by accident. In high-stakes investigations involving active situations, what law enforcement says publicly is just as strategic as what they do privately. Every statement released to the media is calculated. Every detail withheld has a reason behind it. On February 3rd, 2 days after Nancy was reported missing, Sheriff Nanos stood before cameras and addressed the public directly. He confirmed that the case was being treated as a criminal investigation. He confirmed that law enforcement believed Nancy had been taken against her will. And he made something else very clear. The Guthrie family, every sibling, every spouse, every person connected to Nancy by blood or by marriage, had been looked at thoroughly, and none of them were responsible for what happened to her. He did not hedge on that point. He stated it plainly. The Guthrie family are victims, Nanos said. Plain and simple. That public declaration carried enormous weight. In any investigation involving a missing family member, law enforcement is required, both legally and procedurally, to examine the people closest to the victim first. It is standard investigative protocol. The people who know you best, who have access to your home, who know your daily routine, they are always the starting point. Not because suspicion is personal, but because statistics and case history demand it. In the days that followed, that protocol played out visibly and publicly in a way that drew intense media scrutiny. On February 5th, investigators executed a search warrant on the home of Tommaso Cioni, the son-in-law who had dropped Nancy off on the night of January 31st. Law enforcement arrived with blue latex gloves and evidence collection equipment. They spent several hours inside the property. When they left, they carried out brown paper evidence bags and a specialized silver briefcase, the kind typically used by digital forensic units to transport hard drives, phones, and other electronic devices. The local and national media captured the entire operation from the sidewalk. The internet reacted immediately. Speculation exploded across social media platforms. People began analyzing photographs of Tommaso Cioni side by side with the blurry doorbell camera footage. They pointed to physical similarities. They circulated theories. Within hours, a man who had not been charged with anything, who had not been named as a suspect, was being treated as one by millions of strangers online. Then on February 7th, investigators returned to the Cioni home for a second time. Another visible, documented search. More equipment. More hours spent inside. More footage captured by news cameras parked on the street. And then on February 16th, Sheriff Nanos put an end to all of it. In a formal public statement, Nanos confirmed that Tommaso Cioni and all other family members had been fully cleared. He called the searches a necessary and legally required part of the investigative process, not evidence of guilt. He explained that in any future prosecution, a defense attorney has the constitutional right to argue that law enforcement failed to investigate everyone with access to the victim. By conducting those searches thoroughly and visibly, investigators were building a solid procedural record. They were closing off every avenue a defense could later use in court. Nanos went further. He directly addressed the media and called on journalists to report with accuracy and with compassion. He asked them to stop spreading unverified claims about a family that was already going through one of the hardest seasons of their lives. On February 24th, the sheriff's department announced it would discontinue its practice of releasing daily updates. Going forward, public statements would only be issued when new information genuinely warranted it. Department spokesperson Angelica Carrillo confirmed that detectives and FBI agents were continuing to work around the clock. The reduction in public updates, she emphasized, was not a sign that momentum had slowed. It was a reflection of investigative strategy. In sensitive cases, saying too much can compromise the very leads investigators are working to protect. The FBI maintained a steady and well-resourced presence throughout. Federal agents canvassed neighborhoods. They reviewed footage. They fielded tips. They brought tools and capabilities that local departments simply do not have access to on their own. The presence of the FBI in a local missing persons case signals one thing clearly. The people leading this investigation believed, from very early on, that what happened to Nancy Guthrie was serious enough to require a federal response. That belief never wavered, even as the weeks passed, even as the tips slowed, even as the search entered its fourth week with no arrest and no named suspect. The investigation remained, by every official account, active and moving forward. What law enforcement would not say publicly was just as telling as what they did say. They would not confirm a motive. They would not confirm whether the Ransom communications were credible. They would not release the full contents of the doorbell camera analysis. And they would not name a person of interest. In investigative terms, that silence is not emptiness. It is discipline. It is the deliberate, careful management of information in a case where one wrong move, one premature disclosure, could unravel months of work. The people running this investigation knew more than they were saying. That has been clear from the very beginning. And the decision to hold that information close was not made carelessly. It was made because somewhere out there, the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie still existed. And they were not willing to let it slip away. There are cases that stay inside the borders of a city. Cases that the local news covers for a few days before the headlines move on and the world forgets. The disappearance of Nancy Guthrie was not one of those cases. From the moment her name was released to the public, this story traveled. Fast, far, and with a force that no one in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood had ever experienced before. Within days of the initial reports, the quiet residential street outside Nancy Guthrie's home had transformed into something unrecognizable. News vans lined the road. Cameras were pointed at her front door around the clock. Live streamers set up equipment on the sidewalk and broadcast continuously to audiences of thousands. Local reporters stood in front of her house, giving updates. National correspondents flew into Tucson. The neighborhood, which had never asked for any of this, suddenly found itself at the center of one of the most closely watched missing person cases in recent American history. The attention was not only media-driven. Ordinary people responded too. Community members brought flowers and handmade posters to Nancy Street. Signs bearing her photograph appeared outside her home. Residents of Tucson who had never met Nancy Guthrie stood in front of her house and signed banners that read simply, "Bring her home." That phrase became a rallying point for a city that wanted to do something, anything, to help a family in the middle of an unthinkable situation. But the most powerful voice in this public response was not a news anchor or a community organizer. It was Savannah Guthrie herself. On February 4th, 2026, just 3 days after her mother was reported missing, Savannah appeared in a video posted to social media alongside her siblings Annie and Cameron. She addressed the camera directly. Her words were not scripted the way a press release is scripted. They were the words of a daughter who was running out of time and knew it. She spoke about her mother's health. She said Nancy lived in constant pain. She said her mother was without her medication and needed it not just to manage discomfort, but to stay well. She said the family needed confirmation that Nancy was alive before any further steps could be taken. And then she addressed the person or persons responsible directly. "We want to hear from you," Savannah said, "and we are ready to listen. Please reach out to us." On February 7th, a second video was released. The family had apparently received some form of communication because Savannah said on camera, "We received your message and we understand." She urged that person to continue communicating. She urged them to provide the one thing the family was asking for above everything else: confirmation that Nancy was still alive and in their custody. That confirmation never came publicly. The response from the broader public, however, did not slow down. Tips flooded into the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI from across the country. By the time the investigation entered its fourth week, officials confirmed they had received tens of thousands of tips in total. The volume was so significant that law enforcement had to publicly caution people against calling the FBI tip line to share theories or personal well wishes. They needed actionable information, not noise. President Donald Trump addressed the case publicly, posting on social media that he was deploying all available federal resources to assist in finding Nancy Guthrie. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed at one point that more than 400 law enforcement personnel were actively working the case at the same time. Back on the ground in Tucson, the physical presence of media and public onlookers had grown so large that Pima County officials were forced to step in. On February 25th, County Administrator Jan Lesch issued an official order establishing a temporary no-parking zone covering several blocks in every direction around Nancy's home. Vehicles belonging to news crews, live streamers, and members of the public were required to be cleared from the road by February 26th. Violations carried a fine of $250. The order was a quiet acknowledgement of something that had been building for weeks. The attention surrounding this case had reached a point where it was creating its own set of challenges for the neighborhood and for the investigation itself. What began as a community standing behind a missing grandmother had grown into a situation that required official management. Law enforcement had been consistent on one point throughout all of it. They did not need more eyes on the house. They needed the right piece of information from the right person. One call, one detail, one individual somewhere who knew something and had not yet made the decision to come forward. That person, if they existed, was still silent, and the family was still waiting. If you have ever asked yourself what you would do if someone you loved simply disappeared one night, this case is a reminder that the answer to that question matters more than most people realize. A single tip, a single phone call, that is sometimes all it takes to shift the course of an entire investigation. The number to call is still open, and the reward for the right information is still on the table. 26 days. That is how long it had been since Nancy Guthrie was last seen. 26 days of searches, tip lines, press conferences, reward offers, and forensic analysis. 26 days of a family holding themselves together by sheer will. And at the end of all of it, the most fundamental question in this entire case remained completely unanswered. Where is Nancy Guthrie? That question sits at the center of everything. But surrounding it are smaller questions, sharper ones. Questions that investigators, criminal analysts, and people watching from a distance have been wrestling with since the very first details of this case became public. And it is those questions, the ones without clean answers, that reveal just how complicated this case truly is. The first question involves the suspect himself. Law enforcement confirmed through surveillance footage analysis that the individual who approached Nancy Guthrie's home that night appeared to have visited the property before the night she went missing. 2 photographs obtained by investigators showed the same suspect at her home on separate occasions prior to January 31st. That detail is significant. It tells us this was not a random event. It tells us there was preparation involved. Observation. Someone had studied that house. Someone had watched the routine of an 84-year-old woman living alone and decided, well in advance, that this home and this woman were a deliberate target. The question that follows from that is an uncomfortable one. How long had this person been watching? And what exactly were they looking for before they made their move? The second question involves the Ransom communications themselves. The FBI confirmed it was treating 2 separate email communications as credible enough to investigate. Those emails were sent not to the Guthrie family through private channels, but directly to media organizations. They demanded payment in Bitcoin. They carried deadlines. Both deadlines passed by February 9th without any verified contact between the sender and the family, without any proof of life, without any confirmation that whoever sent those emails had Nancy Guthrie in their custody at all. Criminal investigators and former federal agents who spoke publicly about the case noted that this approach is highly unusual. In verified hostage situations, communication goes directly to the family, quietly and privately. Reaching out to television stations and online news platforms publicly guarantees immediate federal escalation. It guarantees that every financial trail connected to the demand will be monitored and tracked. For anyone who genuinely wanted to collect money through this kind of arrangement, going public was the single worst strategic decision possible. That contradiction has led analysts to raise a question the evidence keeps circling back to. Were those demands sent by the person who actually took Nancy Guthrie? Or were they sent by opportunists who saw a high-profile name in the news and constructed a false demand designed to create confusion and buy time? The FBI has not answered that publicly. But the fact that both deadlines came and went in silence, with no follow-up communication and no proof of life ever provided, raises serious doubts about the origin and credibility of those messages. The third question is the one that refuses to go away no matter how many other details surface. Nancy Guthrie's daily heart medication was found inside her home after she disappeared. She relied on that medication to manage serious cardiac conditions. Savannah Guthrie confirmed this publicly on February 4th when she said her mother was without her medicine and needed it not just to manage discomfort, but to remain stable and well. Every medical professional and every law enforcement analyst who has spoken publicly about this case has said the same thing. An 84-year-old woman with documented heart conditions, separated from her prescribed daily medication, faces serious health risks within a very short period of time. If the goal of taking Nancy Guthrie was to hold her and negotiate for a financial payment, then her well-being was the single most valuable asset in that arrangement. You cannot negotiate for someone who is no longer able to be part of the negotiation. And yet, whoever took Nancy from that home that night walked past her medication and left it sitting right where it was. Former law enforcement officials speaking to national media outlets noted that this detail is one of the most deeply troubling elements in the entire case. It either reflects a startling level of carelessness that is nearly impossible to reconcile with the planning that clearly went into this operation beforehand, or it points towards something far more difficult to accept, that ensuring Nancy remained well was simply never a consideration from the very beginning. The fourth question involves the suspect's behavior on camera before he cut the footage. The FBI's behavioral analysis team reviewed the doorbell camera recording carefully. The suspect's movements in that footage stood out to experienced investigators for reasons that went beyond just identifying his physical description. He remained visible in the frame longer than any tactical calculation would require. He appeared to interact with the landscaping near the entryway, pulling at plants and bushes in a way that served no clear strategic purpose. He positioned himself at multiple points in ways that seemed almost designed to make sure the camera captured specific details about his clothing and his appearance before he reached up and disabled the device entirely. Investigators have not publicly described that behavior as deliberate staging, but the question of whether this individual wanted to be seen on that camera, and if so, why, remains an active part of the behavioral analysis surrounding this case. In most documented abduction cases, the person committing the act wants to be seen as little as possible. They move quickly. They keep their head down. They avoid extended time in front of any lens. This suspect did the opposite, and that choice, deliberate or not, is something investigators are still working to fully understand. What all of these unanswered questions point toward, taken together, is a case that does not fit neatly into a single explanation. The official framework of a ransom-driven abduction is what law enforcement has publicly maintained throughout. But the details beneath that framework raise enough inconsistencies that seasoned investigators, criminal behaviorists, and former federal agents have all acknowledged publicly that the complete picture of what happened to Nancy Guthrie on the night of January 31st remains unclear. The DNA evidence is still being processed. The genetic genealogy work is ongoing. The tip lines remain open. Investigators are still actively working to trace the specific clothing worn by the suspect, including his shoes, jacket, pants, and shirt, in hopes that identifying those items leads them to a name. The FBI has moved portions of its operational presence from Tucson to Phoenix, while confirming the investigation remains fully active and ongoing. The Guthrie family has announced a $500,000 donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, extending the weight of this case into the lives of other families across the country who are waiting for their own answers. Savannah Guthrie said something publicly that no daughter should ever have to put into words. Standing in front of a camera, weeks after her mother vanished, she acknowledged the possibility that Nancy may no longer be found the way the family has been praying for. But she said her family still believes, still holds on, still asks anyone who is watching to keep praying with them. "We still believe that she can come home," she said, "but we need to know where she is." That is where this case stands today. Not closed, not solved, not forgotten. A family is still searching. An investigation is still running. And somewhere, a person exists who knows exactly what happened inside that house during those 41 minutes of silence on the night the camera went dark. That person has not spoken yet, but these cases have a way of reaching people who stay quiet. Evidence builds over time. Rewards shift loyalties. And the one person who finally decides they cannot carry what they know any longer changes everything in a single phone call. Nancy Guthrie deserves answers. Her family deserves to know the truth. And the people of Tucson, Arizona, deserve closure about what happened in their neighborhood on the night of January 31st, 2026. If you have any information related to this case, the FBI tip line is available at 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line is 520-351-4900. A reward of over $1 million remains available for information leading to Nancy's recovery. If this documentary made you stop and think, if it made you feel the weight of what this family is still carrying every single day, then do one thing before you move on. Subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to see it. Because attention keeps cases like this one alive. And keeping this case alive is something every one of us can do for a grandmother who deserves to come home. We will be here when this case moves. Thank you for watching.